Joining us now to discuss President Obama's announcement that $14 billion will be invested into Africa by African companies is Dumi Jere, Head of Strategy Africa from AfriCatalysts. Thank you, Dumi, for your time. I was looking at that figure, $14 billion. So I dug a little bit, obviously preparing for the show. And I came across a figure which says the Chinese last year, I think, announced that by 2015, they will have loaned Africa $1 trillion. The Americans don't get it, do they?
They don't. And I think that's what people are not really picking up about this summit.
Yeah.
It's almost like the Obama administration was trying to play catch up to China. Because remember, China is the one who started with this Africa summit way back in 2001. And then Japan, India, and Europe followed suit. Yeah. So it was almost like the Americans now have to play catch up because they realize the rest of the world is focusing its attention onto Africa. And so, just to give you an example, America wants to has pledged $14 billion in FDI. Yeah. However, when you look back and you rewind to 2012, China actually put in $20 billion in Africa. Yeah. Already. Right. So it is really a catch-up session.
So they are playing catch-up, but actually not even playing the catch-up. In their catch-up, they are not even doing anything to give the impression that they will catch up.
True. Because I think, generally speaking, China is still going to be ahead of them. Yeah.
What is the issue within the Americans? Is it any issue of a country so preoccupied with other parts of the world that they can't see next door to them, if you like, take away the Atlantic Ocean. Next door to them, there is 1 billion people that have been changing their lives for the past 2 decades.
Well, I think sometimes one way to look at it is the generalization of the African continent's problem. Yeah. So when the word Africa comes up, it's almost as if it's just poverty.
Oh, but now it's issues. Ebola, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Ebola and all those issues. Those are the ones that overshadow the good things that are happening on the continent.
Absolutely. And I think part of the problem is us in the media, because I've been looking at the networks and the fascination with Ebola and how everybody's screaming. And someone made a very important point. Sure, we don't want any person to die unnecessarily if it can be prevented. But mosquitoes kill 1 child a month in Africa. And we are talking here about 932 people that have been killed by this disease. Not to minimize its impact or anything. It's one child a day, I've just been told by my director. Yeah. 1 child a day in Africa. Not to minimize or in any way play down the impact that we've got a lot of people that have been killed here. But there is something bigger that's happening here than the general characterization of Africa as a place where nothing happens but trouble.
True. So I think...
How do you change it?
How do we change...
that perception amongst the Americans particularly?
Well, I think, first of all, this summit was a right step. Yeah. Though they are way behind, but it's the right step. And I think it's...
Half a step, maybe.
Yeah. And I think it also calls on the African governments to speak with one voice. Yeah. Sometimes I get the feeling we're not speaking really the same language. Yeah. So I think it calls on them to say, our continent is ready to welcome the rest of the world in terms of investments into this continent. And not only speak, but also put in place policies and harmonize the rules and regulations of the countries and especially regional blocks, because that makes it easier to attract.
Did you get that sense that actually when the Africans went to the US, they had actually policy positions or some kind of strategy in terms of what they wanted to get out of the US as Africans? Or were these individual heads of state that boarded their planes from their little airports and arrived in Washington?
I don't think, I didn't get the sense that...
You did?
Preferably for me, I think had this message gone via probably the AU, and then the AU sort of gets the messages from all the different presidents, and then the AU almost becomes one voice for all the presidents. Then maybe we would speak one language, but it's almost like they all went different agendas, and that's why you see some countries, even though the FDIs were pledged for the continent, but it's like some countries are going to benefit far much more than others. You look at your Nigeria, your Ghana, your South Africa, your Algeria. Those guys are going to benefit far much more than a country like Malawi or Botswana, but that were also represented there.
Yeah, and of course Zimbabwe wasn't represented. Okay, that's another story.
For another day.
If you were to assess the whole thing, a failure or a success in your view?
I think a bit of a failure.
Yeah, mark it out of 10 if you will.
4.
4.
I would have expected far much more in terms of FDI.
Yeah.
Especially coming from a big powerhouse like America. Also, when you look at when you look at how much FDI they put in other continents, it's far much more than what they're pledging to put into the African continent.
Yeah.
So yes, they did, and yes, it's appreciated. It will take us further, but I get the feeling they could have done far much more.
But part of the handicap, of course, is that this is not something that is driven by government. It's driven by the profit motive. In other words, individual companies coming and deciding whether they want to be in on this. Could perhaps there be room for a change in tack, if you like? Because we've seen from a presidential level, the government is coming in and saying we will help on the electricity side. And companies obviously coming in their individual capacity. So Walmart here, GE there, and all these other companies everywhere else.
Yeah, so I think there's one of the top Nigerian entrepreneurs, Tony Elumelu, who was also there at the US Africa Summit, and he said something about governments and private sector needing to work far much more hand in hand. And the point that he was trying to raise was that, especially when you look at, for example, the power issue, it's easier for investors to invest in a regional grid as opposed to one country and then all the other countries come back into that. So yes, it's a joint effort between government and private sector.
Absolutely. Dumi, we have to leave it there. Thanks very much indeed. The son of Africa is failing Africa. The son of Africa, of course, is Barack Obama. Don't forget, his father was Kenyan. He is an African. Dumi Jere is head of strategy on Africa from AfriCatalysts.